byler has to be one of the biggest missed opportunities in television history, and there was so much tension and setup for their bond and for their dynamic to develop this season. So for none of that to come to fruition was genuinely just sad. But I just want to talk about why I think byler should have happened. So let's just go back to the start, season one and season two. Mike and Will's bond, it was already very close. They were best friends. Mike literally fought a kid because they called Will gay. And that's the first sort of hint towards this internalized homophobia dimension, because for Mike to react so abrasively to, Will being called gay shows almost a reluctance towards that term, and how Mike almost fears this, innately different concept. And that's why he reacted so negatively to when that kid called Will gay. So from then onwards, we see Malevolent start to develop a bit, but I honestly hated that relationship since the start, and we need to talk about it a little bit to talk about byler. But there was always a sort of superiority and God complex held by Mike in their relationship, because Mike controlled the relationship. He controlled 11, basically, and Elle was not really familiar with human society and the concept of love till she kind of met Mike, and Mike was almost a sort of godlike figure to her because Mike took her in. Mike was the one who taught her what it means to be a human, what it means to make friends. So basically, everything about human existence was defined to Elle by Mike. So Mike always wielded a sort of control over her. But just leaving that to the side, Mike and Will's dynamic in the first two seasons, they were innately closer than just friends. There was always a sort of deeper subtext between them. How, Mike said the best thing he ever did in life was meet Will, and he had already met Elle by this point. So for Mike to say that the best thing he ever did in his life was be Will's friend, there was some romantic subtext there that should have been explored. Why was that not explored, honestly? But it's just very disappointing that none of that was ever expanded upon. And the whole crazy together, how protective Mike was over Will, none of that really gets a proper resolution. But yeah, the first two seasons, they have so much build up for their bond, and they really describe Mike and Will as, a level beyond best friends. But then we sort of get to season three, and I think that this season did the most for byler, and I really thought that it would happen. But okay, let's talk about it. So when the car and the rain scene happened, where what did Mike say? He says, "It's not my fault you don't like girls. Did you really think that we were just gonna spend the rest of our lives, in my basement and never get girlfriends?" This showed Mike's idealized reality, and it showed the internalized homophobia that he wielded. Because the concept that there was this overarching goal for them to all get girlfriends, and how Mike almost taunted and resented the concept that Will wasn't like everybody else, that was the nail in the coffin, because that showed that basically half of Mike's character was centered around living up to this idealized heterosexual relationship, which was also the embodiment of Malevolent. It was idealized. Because when we, go back to season two, in the snowball dance and stuff, 11 is down to basically just be a family member to Mike, It was Mike who makes that decision that, oh, he wanted to bring her to the dance and that there was a romantic subtext there. Mike always wielded control of that relationship. It was almost like Mike wielded Elle as a trophy, And bringing Elle to that dance was sort of like the embodiment of Mike being societally conveyed as a heterosexual. And for Mike to say that about Will, that, oh, you don't like girls, we were always going to get girlfriends, that shows he almost feared the concept of being homosexual and not getting a girlfriend and not living the same life that everybody else does. So, yeah, for that scene to exist and for that internalized homophobia to never be explained, it's honestly just crazy. And they don't really give us a good resolution as to why Mike would say that. Did he feel guilty? Honestly, what was his motivation in saying that? Yeah, it's just very disappointing. But when we get to season 4, this honestly gave the most setup for Byler. Yeah, it had to give it the most because the tension between Malevolent, I genuinely thought Byler was going to happen. Because how is it that Mike can't say I love you to his girlfriend? Is he just a bad boyfriend? Does he not love Elle? Was this relationship always idealized? Does saying I love you make it too definite? Would him saying I love you be a lie? Because when you think about it, Mike only said I love you to Elle when Will was on his shoulder and he was like, oh, you're the heart, you're the heart. So Mike never really said that he loved Elle of his own accord. His relationship with Elle always served as that idealized heterosexual relationship that he had because of this internalized homophobia that was, developing through this period of time. And that's almost why, he feels a reluctance in communicating with Will, because to secede that desire to Will would mean being different, He was scared of that. He was like, oh, I feel like we kind of got lost, I was scared to talk to you. Will should have talked to him. That fear that Mike had of him talking to Will and what that would have meant for him, and that it would have meant that he was really different and that he wouldn't have had this idealized version of reality that he had imagined with this, entire internalized homophobia complex. It was just disappointing that that relationship just wasn't explored this season. And I think that was innately set up to give Byler something. Just anything would have been better than what they did, honestly. I'm very disappointed. I feel queer baited in a way. But this is the reality of how queer media exists. And for some reason, queer media has to be based on self-acceptance rather than, romance, and the actual concept that you can love somebody else without it being this prized, end goal, and that a queer relationship can't be a part of that self-acceptance. It was pretty weird. And the epilogue boyfriend of it all, the epilogue boyfriend fulfilled such a dangerous trope that queer relationships don't deserve to be explored in the same way, and that Will doesn't really get a love interest, but he gets a love interest in the end, so it's all okay. And Will's love doesn't have to be explored. His, navigation with relationships doesn't deserve to be explored. It's just that was not the message that I thought the Duffers were going to set, but I guess it was. So yeah, there was just infinite build-up for Mike and Will, and for nothing to be done with that. It is innately queer bait, and I think that if you cared about this relationship at all, you weren't dumb. You were just analyzing the clues, and you thought that the Duffers wouldn't be scared of fulfilling, this wish of accepting marginalized groups, especially when the show was supposed to be about outcasts. You didn't expect them to sideline outcasts, and that's okay. You watch the show as a critical thinker, and you just thought of an innately better storyline than the Duffers did, and I don't know, you deserve more. We deserve more. Byler deserved more. So I'm sorry, guys. I wish it happened, but